Welcome to Smashed Avo Property. Today is part 2 of the Common First Home Buyer Questions series, and I'm joined again by the host of the Millennial Investor podcast and my good friend Joey DeGarda, where I get the opportunity to grill him on some tough questions for the second time. In this episode, we'll be covering some common questions that get asked when someone is in the stage of looking for a property. So flowing on from our first episode, they've decided that they do actually want to go ahead and purchase a property, and are now in the position to start looking through listings.
Buying that very first property, you should be going to get a feel of absolutely everything. Let's say you're just looking at one-bedroom apartments, for argument's sake. Go and have a look at what two bedrooms are worth and what you could get for your money at that level. So just to say that there's nothing online within your specific suburb, within your particular price point and what particular dwelling type, branch out, go to the next suburb, go a higher price point, go and have a look at a style of dwelling with different number of beds just to get your research underway. Because again, buying a property you don't want to jump into, you want to kind of get a really good feel for.
As always, seek your own professional financial, legal, taxation and property investing advice for your current situation. Everything we talk about is just our opinion and general in nature and should never be considered as personal advice. This episode is brought to you by pricefinder.com.au, the new home for property data. Pricefinder collects property data from multiple sources so you don't have to, including property ownership, phone numbers, property zoning, title information, over 30 years of sales history and real-time auction results. So without any further ado, let's get house hunting with Joey. What's going on, guys? It is Jordan DeYoung.
And this is Joey DeGarda.
And we are back for round 2. Our first episode had a pretty good success rate. I've had a couple of people reach out and say that there were some questions in there that they actually wanted to ask, but they haven't asked anyone. So some awesome feedback from that. Getting some more questions coming through, guys. So we're kind of building a list of things from all of our listeners, and we're going to have a big Q&A session. So if you do have questions, continue to send them through. My email is hi@jordandeyong.com, and Joey, correct me if I get this wrong, but it's joey@estroproperty.com.au or just .com. Correct?
Just .com, yep.
Yeah, beautiful. So today is going to be part 2 of the series, we're going to call this "I'm Buying. What Do I Need to Know?" So part 1 was kind of I'm thinking about buying property. You know, there's ins, there's outs. What are the questions? What do I need to do? What do I need to get prepared? All of those sort of hard and curious questions that people do ask. But now we're sort of approaching it as if I'm ready to buy a property, but where do I kind of start? Where do I look? Do I look online? You know, what are the sort of things that I should be looking out for? You know, do I just put an offer on a property? And I think Joey and I have put some good questions together today, and we feel like it's going to be a good one. How are you feeling about it, Joey?
Mate, I'm really looking forward to it. As I said, when we kind of were nutting these questions out, I kind of gathered some questions that close friends and family of mine have asked me. And obviously it's dinner chats, it's family barbecues where the uncle's thrown out his 2 bobs worth. So I'm really interested to cover off some of these and hopefully the audience finds it valuable.
100%, mate. And I think we're going to do the same sort of role playing we did last time. I'll throw the hard questions, and Joey will try and answer them to the best of his ability. But again, guys, it's just going to be a bit of an overview. Obviously, we don't know your personal circumstances and can't answer everything to an exact T. But I'll try and relay as much as I can of my own brain and knowledge after Joey's finished, and we can try and give you some good insights from the get-go. But I think you're ready, Joey. I'm ready. Are you ready?
Yeah, mate, let's get started.
All right. Question 1. Joey, I can't find anything online. There's no listings. I've been through realestate.com. I've been through Domain. And no listing matching my criteria. What should I do?
Yeah, look, really popular question. And it's one that one of my closest friends has actually asked me in the last fortnight. There's nothing meeting the budget or nothing meeting the pocket that they want to buy in. Do we just delay it? And my answer is absolutely not. Firstly, if you're buying that very first property, you should be going to get a feel of absolutely everything. Let's say you're just looking at one-bedroom apartments, for argument's sake. Go and have a look at what 2 bedrooms are worth and what you could get for your money at that level. So just to say that there's nothing online within your specific suburb, within your particular price point and what particular dwelling type, branch out, go to the next suburb, go a higher price point, go and have a look at a style of dwelling with different number of beds just to get your research underway. Because again, buying a property you don't want to jump into, you want to kind of get a really good feel for. Secondly to that, just because it's not listed online doesn't mean that there aren't properties transacting in the background. There's a whole bunch of properties that transact before they actually hit the market, pre-market, or even off-market ones that were are never going to make their way onto real estate or domain. So don't think for a second that what you see online is the only thing that's there.
100%. And, when we think about the markets that you and I focus in, Joey, is, bottom end, we're sort of talking that $500,000 range. And then, upwards of 1.5 million is kind of acceptable now, really, in the Sydney and Melbourne markets. But, when we think of Australia, there's thousands of markets, sub-markets within Australia, and you can almost buy a property at any price point, really. I mean, I know some buyers agents that only buy in that sort of $200,000 price mark. And I've heard people buy properties for $50,000. And I'm not saying that, you should go out and buy those types of properties. I think they're actually not what we would consider A-grade investment properties. But what I'm trying to get at is that there's a range of different prices of properties everywhere. And so, as Joey was alluding to there, it might not just be, the areas that you are looking to buy in, but if you even just, branch out a little bit, go in another 5K radius, 10K radius out from where you're thinking, and just sort of see what's available in those sort of suburbs, maybe something may come up. And obviously you've got to still align your goals and your risk profile with any individual property you're looking at. But there are different markets within markets within markets. Even, one side of a street that's got beach views will be a completely different price to the other side of the street that doesn't have any views of the beach. And so they're just the little things that you've got to look out for and consider when you're looking to buy an investment property. I think I'm not a buyer's agent, but Joey definitely nailed it on the head there with off-market listings. And I know Joey's just done a great podcast on that. If you want to go and listen to it, it's his most recent one. But he talks about properties off-market and the difference between off-market and pre-market. And that's a big one to really identify with. We won't get into it here, so you can go listen to it there. But, there are properties that we don't know about that happen all the time. And, sorry to bang on this question, but I'm in this position at the moment, and, I'm in the position to looking to buy another property, and the lady next door just bought another property and she's looking to sell hers and move out. And I'm kind of like, should I go and buy that one if I can get it too cheap? And Joey was the first person I reached out to. I said, hey, Joey, what do you reckon about this sort of scenario? And, we also bang on about diversification and all that sort of stuff, which is why I'm probably not going to proceed with the process. But that would be considered a pre-market property or even an off-market property. I don't know. I mean, maybe you can clarify that for us, Joey. But essentially, it hasn't, been listed online yet. So if I was to approach her as a friendly neighbor and say, hey, listen, I'm in the market. What are you thinking? What sort of price point do you think we can buy? Then maybe we could come up with a deal where, works better for us because it's a cheaper price point, and works better for them because they don't have to, pay the sales agents fees and all the other costs that are involved in getting photos and all the rest of it. But Joey, just for clarification for the audience, would that be pre-market or?
So mate, it comes down to what the vendor's motive is. So the fact that you've got that so early, I'd probably say that would be off-market. Pre-market would be the vendor's motivated to sell. They've touched base with their local real estate agent and the property is going to go on the market, and the agent reaches out to prospective buyers saying, hey, I've got XYZ property. You've actually got the step before, just because you know that they're thinking about moving out. And as I said in my podcast there, the how to score off-market property, that's one of the ways that you can score off-market properties through friends, families, neighbours. You've actually got in that stage earlier, completely off the market. No real estate agent's been engaged yet. It's completely behind closed doors, will never make its way online. No one will ever know about it. It's happened just between yourself and your neighbour. So again, as you've pointed out, you're saving on agent commission fees, marketing costs, and putting the property online as well. So there's so many other transaction fees that the seller will be able to save, and therefore pass on the savings to you, giving yourself a slightly better purchase price.
Yeah, and I think what I just want to emphasize on that a little bit is that's how simple it is. Like I remember not knowing a whole bunch about property and, having agents, they sort of secretly come up to you and they go, hey, I've got this off-market property, you should come and buy it. And you think it's all secret and exclusive and, you got the rights to have first dibs at this property. But in all honesty, it's everyone's your neighbor or your friend or your family member. It's that simple. And so that's an easier way to understand what off-market, pre-market and on-the-market properties are. But yeah, if you want to learn more, go and check out Joey's podcast. I'll learn a ton from it, so I reckon you will too. So question number 2, I found a property, Joey, and I absolutely love it. It's the first property that I found. I've been to the inspection. My partner loves it. We want to go ahead. This is the first weekend that we've been to an inspection. Should we buy it?
Now, really hard one. My gut wants me to say no, do not buy it. But my experience of the buyers as a buyer's agent tells me don't discard it either, because it's happened a couple of times. But it really depends. So, for example, let's say you've gone and engaged the services of a buyer's agent. So, for example, client X who came to visit me last year and client Y late last year both had the same experience where they've given me their brief. I've gone away and found some properties. I mean, these ones happened to be off market at the time, so they weren't publicly listed. So I found a handful, curated them, shortlisted, presented it to my clients. And it happened to be that the first 3 out of the first 5 that I curated just ticked every single one of their boxes. It was perfect. It was phenomenal. But because we were so early on in the piece, my client didn't want to purchase the property. Now, fast forward 6 months, we ended up buying something which they were happy with, but they always regretted not buying that very first one. So I'm not going to say don't discard it, particularly if you've engaged the services of a professional who have gone out of their way to curate a detailed and specific list of properties for you. But if you're the everyday punter who's just starting their journey, absolutely, I would be looking at this a hell of a lot harder. Than you would be making sure that you've gone out, at least inspected a handful of other properties, even if it's the same day or during the week or during a cooling off period. Make sure that you can really do some research and some diligence, and really just for yourself so you can compare, and making sure that you aren't just diving into the very first property you're seeing. So on the whole, I wouldn't be buying that very first purchase, but there are some circumstances where it may be a perfect one for you.
I think you touched on something really critical there, and it is when you are using a buyer's agent. And the difference with using a buyer's agent is, they're buying properties every day. They're in the market. They're watching things. That's their job. That's their blood. They love it. They breathe their property. They breathe it every single day. And so, it's not their first property. So although it might be your first property, they've gone out of their way to do a detailed report and identify the property as a potential. If a buyer's agent is presenting you with a property, they've done some serious due diligence already to recommend that property. So although it might be a little bit of a shock and a little bit of I don't know, I want to see what else is out there, it's not their first rodeo, although it may be yours. And I think, if you weren't using a buyer's agent, Joey, you're spot on there, because I remember going back to my first property, and that's, when I was looking for my first property, that's the same process I went through. I've found a property. I absolutely loved it. I had to get it. And I think a lot of first home buyers go through that same thing. And it's kind of like the whole FOMO kicks in as well. You're kind of like, it's a hot market at the moment. Everyone's going to buy it. I need to get it. And that's unfortunately one of the biggest problems with investing in property is our emotions drive our decisions most of the time. And so, specifically if you've got a big situation coming up, like you're having a kid, or your partner really loves the property and, they really, really want it. And it's kind of like, yeah, that's all well and good, but it's our first one and we really should just see what else is out there. And, don't discard it. Obviously, it could be the perfect property. You could see it week one and know that it's a perfect property. But if you really think it is the perfect property, take some really quick action to just, look at the last 6 months worth of sales, identify everything else that's on the market. You can do these things pretty quickly and make sure that it is the right one. Go, even if you're not interested in the other properties that are available on the market, go to their open homes, just see what they're like, see what your thought process is. And, if you go to another one and all of a sudden, now that's the new one, then that's probably a bit of a red flag to say, okay, maybe I should hold the reins a little bit and maybe do some more due diligence on the properties that I want to buy.
Maybe I'm a little bit too impulsive.
yeah, exactly. Which, I'll put my hand up. I've done that before, so don't feel too bad if you're not in the same boat. So, okay, I've got my own experience of this, Joey, but how long does finding a property usually take?
I'm going to come straight back to how I started the previous answer. It really depends on whether you've got a professional that's on your side, whether you've got an advisor, a buyer's agent, family, friends that transact in this stuff on a daily basis or a weekly basis or at least a yearly basis. It really depends on that. So I'll run through a couple of scenarios. So let's say you do have the services of a professional on your side, potentially anywhere between 2 to 8 weeks. And it really could be that simple. It could even be within the first 3 weeks, because again, as I've said, these professionals wouldn't be presenting these properties to you. What good would they be doing if they're just presenting you properties that don't meet your brief? They're only presenting you stuff that ticks your boxes. So there could be something here there in the first handful of weeks if you've got the professional on your side. If you're just going out there into the market and this is your very first purchase, you're doing this out on your own, I want you to give yourself months. Unless for whatever reason something comes up, you really should be doing as much research as possible. I want you to go through countless open homes, provided the environment that we see ourselves in, which we now can go visit some open homes depending on where you live. Go through as many properties as possible just so you can start to get a feel. You'll get a range. You'll go, gee, this one's a bit tight. Can't believe that they want X dollars for it. So you can really start to get a good understanding of the market yourself before you jump into, okay, yep, I'm ready to make an offer on a particular property.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more there, mate. I think if you're doing it on your own, it's months at a minimum. I mean, I come from a very analytical profession, and so my everyday is trying to find something wrong with it. And unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, I brought that to my property investment journey. And so both of my properties have taken 4 to 6 months to really find the perfect property that I want to buy. And obviously no property is perfect. There might be, a handful of suburbs in Australia that tick every single box. But when it comes to identifying those fundamental things, you really do need to, and this is why we always say, start with your goals, start with your risk profile, start with your financial position, get your finance in order. And once you have all those things, then you can put a checklist together of the fundamentals that you need to look for. And as we just said, even if it is the first one, that's all well and good, but you need to go and check all these other properties to see if they tick all the boxes too. And, if every property is ticking all your boxes, then maybe you need to redefine that list. So again, it's not just go out and search and scroll through listings and go to open homes 10 times in a weekend, because that'll kill your weekends. But, really define that list, that checklist to start off with, and then, filter down that search results and identify 3 properties or 4 properties every weekend you can go to.
At the same time, it's important, particularly with first home buyers, to understand that, it's a big step, but to not fall into I love the phrase analysis paralysis, where you just sit on the sideline and you look at everything that could go wrong and, gee, the market could tank and, oh, maybe I'll lose my job, and you could think of everything wrong and you could never buy. So I understand that particularly with first home buyers, it's a really big step, but it's important to analyze, but not to scare yourself out of buying altogether.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great phrase that I've forgotten, analyst paralysis. And essentially it just means that you're not moving forward or making any traction on your investment decision because you're over analyzing everything. And I've been guilty of it. So, although we are saying months, don't let it roll out to 6, 7, 8, 12 months. Do your due diligence and do your hard work. But once you've got some key fundamentals and understand exactly what it is that you're looking for, then, if that type of property comes up, go for gold. Like just make it happen. And 6 months in the market, your property prices could raise 20, 30, 40, 50 grand. So, the quicker you execute in a seller's market, the better off you're going to be, really. If you're in a buyer's market, you might have a little bit more time up your sleeve and can analyze and talk to agents a little bit more and have a bit of an advantage. But it all depends on the type of market you're into as well. So, Joey, I absolutely hate this property, but my partner absolutely loves it. They don't want to look at anything else. They don't want to go to any other inspections. They just want this property, and it's a little bit out of our price range and, not exactly what I was hoping for. But what do you think we should do with this scenario?
I'm dealing with that as we speak currently with a husband and wife. Now it's really tricky. So it really depends what the purchase is about. If it's for an investment, it's a lot easier for you to kind of go, well, let's strip everything apart. It should come down to the fundamentals and the numbers if we're making this purchase for an investment. If you're an owner-occupier, however, if you're buying that property to live in, then it's really, really difficult because ultimately there has to be some kind of compromise because it's a place that you're going to live in. It's definitely about the numbers, but it's not entirely about the numbers. It's where you can raise your family or where you can see yourself living for the rest of your life. So there does genuinely need to be a compromise between partners if it's that owner-occupier. But if it's for investment, then 100% go and get some advice. Go and speak, even if it's not a professional advisor, even if it's just a third party that doesn't know much but knows enough, just to say, guys, pull your heads in. It should be about X, Y, and Z. Does it make good financial sense? If so, yes. If it doesn't, then it's got to be scrapped from the equation. So it really, two streams, owner-occupier versus investor. Owner-occupier is a hell of a lot harder, and there just needs to be some kind of compromise down the track, and that's what I'm working through right now as well. And it is good for couples to have that third party do, the husband and wife that I'm dealing with now that are debating about a certain property that a wife loved one, but the husband wants to push on and find something else. And then at least I can provide some kind of financial context to the argument, which might sway or bring them into alignment.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, you've touched on some really key points there, which is, sometimes each party does have to sacrifice something. And, when we are buying an occupier development property, it's a lifelong journey. Like you want to be comfortable living in there for the rest of your life. And as we banged on about pretty heavily in the first one, is it's a 10-year minimum process. It's a 60-year ideal, outlook. So, although you might hate it, maybe you should try and find the good things about it. What are the good attributes that the property does provide? Is it something that you would potentially be happy to live in for the next 60 years if you made some minor changes? Is there some renovations that you can do and sort of, put the pros and the cons against each other, and, maybe even try and find a con or two that your partner might not like and try and compromise in that retrospect, and just put all the cards on the table really, and you can make a logical decision from it. But essentially, we don't want to be buying this thing, regretting it, and then 2 years later putting it on the market and actually losing money because of stamp duty, and it was you bought in a hot market and now it's a cold market and all those things, and that does happen when you're transacting property in short periods of time. Financially, I mean, even if the property grows by $50,000, it could have cost way more than that in solicitor fees and stamp duty and everything else that goes into purchasing property, and agent seller fees. So it is a big decision, and take everything into consideration before you irrationally decide, all right, well, if my partner just wants it, then I'm just going to go for it. So Joey, if I buy this property, I'm going to have used all of my savings. Like, I'm not going to have, I might have a couple of grand left in my account, but most of it's going to be gone. And I'm not really sure if I'm ready to make that sort of commitment.
Yeah, so something that I've dealt with personally myself, and I'm sure you're in the same position when you made your first purchase too, being at such a young age. So it's something that you definitely have to deal with. And if it doesn't hit you, then I don't know if there's something wrong with you, to be honest. So it has to be something that does run through your head when you're making that purchase, unless you've got ample amount of money in the bank. If you're in the age bracket that we are in now, to put down your deposit, you are using most of your funds. So the way that you look at it is, again, as we've touched on from the first podcast, identify your goals. If that was your goal, then it's obviously going to come at a cost. Yes, this is the cost. One thing I do need to throw out there is make sure that you do have a buffer. Do not use 99.9% of your savings to make this purchase. Make sure that you have a little bit of a rainy day bucket for the environment that we see ourselves in now, because you wouldn't want to make that purchase and then have to turn around 5 minutes later and then sell it. So it's something that I am working through right now with my best mate who's looking to make a purchase, but he is very mindful that he's worked for the last X amount of years just to get himself to this position and to see it go. So the way I kind of settle that fear is by making sure that the purchase that we are making is really, it's sound, it's backed, it's going to be a great one that's going to last in the test of time, to just provide him that confidence and knowing that, yes, I understand it's your hard-earned savings, but it's going to something that's going to work even harder for you in the years to come.
Yeah, spot on. And I think, having a safety net or a safety buffer, as some people call it, is, the fundamental there. I mean, I've just transitioned from a 3-month safety net to a 6-month safety net. So, if my partner and I both lost our jobs and we had no income from our properties, meaning they weren't being Airbnb'd out or leased out, there was no income coming through, I've got 6 months to hold my ground and find a way to get out of that sort of position. And, some people think that is pretty extreme, but that's my personal risk profile. Like that's what allows me to sleep 8 hours every single night like a baby, and I wouldn't substitute that out for everything. I mean, I've just suggested that we're in the position to buy again, and I could use some of that cash buffer heavily to buy another investment property. But realistically, if I sacrificed some of that cash buffer and then got myself into a position where I wasn't comfortable and, agitated and anxious and not myself for the next 6 months until I saved back up that cash buffer, it's just not worth the pressure in my head. I mean, I'm comfortable with the position that I'm in now, and, getting another investment property is just a blessing in disguise. So really, you just got to know what you're comfortable with, figure out your risk profile, and then, if you've only going to have $2 or $3 grand left in the bank account after the purchase, I would seriously reconsider or identify other ways that you may potentially be able to borrow that. If that's getting a higher LVR, which means you have to pay lender's mortgage insurance and all the rest of it, that might seem a bit of a risk for you, but at least you've got 10 or 20 or 30 extra grand available to you if you need to. So I think just identify your own risk profile and figure out what's going to help you sleep at night, I guess. So Joey, the guy at work says to buy an off the plan for depreciation reasons. And I think that's going to save me a little bit of money in terms of income tax. And I think I'm going to get a big tax return at tax time. Do you think this is a good idea?
Putting it bluntly, no. It's depending on, look, let's say you absolutely fell in love with an off the plan purchase and you want to live there, and there's no way of talking you out of it, which I'll probably try and talk you out of it at first, but you still want to live there, then ultimately that's your decision. But if you're talking for investment purchases, and even for an owner occupier, as I said, I'll try and talk you out of it. For an investment purchase, it was big. It was big, say 10 to 15 years ago, when you were able to, say, put down a 5% deposit, and then on completion of the project, when the mortgage, I suppose, had to start getting paid, the property was valued at an extra 20%, and then you just sell it before you even took out the actual loan, and you'd turn 20 into 150 grand in 18 months by doing nothing. That did happen in terms of people making some quick cash. In the latest boom that we saw, when people were buying properties off the plan 2016, 17, as they came to completion in 2018, 2019, there were some horror stories. And I've got one, a friend of mine's friend actually bought a property off the plan, put down his 10% deposit, and then in 18 months' time, when the building was completed, the valuation came in $80,000 less than what he bought it for. And so the bank wasn't going to give him the money for it. He actually had to stump up the additional $80,000 or forego his deposit in the first place. So absolute horror stories with off the plan during the most recent boom. Yeah, the fact that it can save you money come depreciation, you can actually score some depreciation on established property anyway. So it's not the only way to get depreciation. And you should not be investing in property just to save money on tax. It's not the reason why we do it, and I definitely advise against it.
Yeah, for sure. And if you want a first-hand experience or story, go back to Mike Johnson's episode on Smashed Avo property. He was in the same position, bought an off-the-plan apartment, and although the bank valuation came in at the expected cost, his construction time blew out significantly. Where he thought he would only be in construction for 12 to 18 months, they were still building after 3 years. And so, one of the things that they didn't consider is the extra 60 grand they're going to have to put towards renting while they were building. So, there are other things that do go into buying off the plan and other factors that you have to consider whilst it's in the construction stage. And as Zoe just alluded to there are some pretty significant horror stories. And I think just touching on the depreciation point briefly is, the best thing that I've ever heard is, why would you spend $1 to get 30 cents back? And that's essentially what depreciation is. You're only getting 30 cents back on the dollar of what you can depreciate. So, you're buying a brand new, shiny apartment that's got the best bench tops and the best sink washers and kitchen tapware and everything else that you can think of. But that material depreciates, and that's why you're able to claim the depreciation, but you're only getting 30 cents back for what you spend. So just be very cautious there all round with buying off the plan. I'm not saying never do it. There are some good success stories, but I've heard way more horror stories than success ones. So be very considerate there. So Joey, I'm about to buy, and all I'm going to pay, I'm about to buy a property for $500,000. So all I need to pay is $500,000, right? Or is there some other expenses that I should be aware of?
So yeah, again, a really common one. People have say that $50,000 saved and think that they can put down the 10% deposit on that $500,000 property and they're done. Absolutely not. So fortunately, we do have some schemes that can offset some stamp duties and whatnot. But let's say just for an off-the-shelf purchase where there's no schemes or anything or any grants given to you, you've got costs. For example, the biggest one is going to be your stamp duty on that $500,000 purchase here in New South Wales. It's say between $18,000 and $19,000. So it's huge. It's a massive, massive cost that you do have to pay. On top of that, you've got you should have a conveyancer, a solicitor that works for you throughout the duration. Some of them charge per contract review. So you give them, let's say you go and you found a property and you want them to review a contract. Some of them charge for that. Good ones won't. Good ones will just do the work for you and they'll charge you at settlement for whatever property that you purchase. Shout out to Dad. There's a free plug for you there, Dad. He'll do that for you. On top of that, you've also got, if you're buying into a strata complex, you should be buying strata reports. These can range anywhere between, you can now buy these $49 ones and pay the balance on the settlement if you're successful. And they could range anywhere from $50 to $350. And they give you the condition of the actual building. They can run through the funds that the body corporate has. So again, these are pretty comprehensive reports that you should be purchasing and should be giving to your solicitor to review. So again, there's extra costs there. You've got building and pest reports. If you're buying a house, that should really be done to detect any kind of termite damage, structural damage. These are all, again, you're making purchases that are going to be anywhere from $100,000 to $5 million. Why wouldn't you spend that little bit of money there? So again, strata reports anywhere between $50 and $350. Building and pests could be anywhere again from $400 to $800. If you've engaged the services of a buyer's agent, there's some agent fees there as well. So there are a plethora of other costs, many of which are unavoidable, some of which are optional. But yeah, do not think for a second that if you are making that purchase, that the purchase price of the property is all you ever have to pay.
Come on, mate. What's your dad's business?
Here it is, Dad. So he's Angelo DeGarda solicitor. He'll do mobile conveyancing. He'll come to you, flat fee. He'll do all your conveyancing. If you don't buy the property, you don't get charged. He'll only charge you on the one property that you do end up buying. So there you go, Dad. You're welcome.
Well, mate, I thought it was going to be, I thought you done very well there. It's almost like you got it prepared. I thought you were just going to give an email and a phone number, but I'm impressed, mate. Shout out to
any inquiries, hit me up.
Shout out to Joey's old man. Yeah, I think, a good rule of thumb when you are purchasing a property is 5% of the purchase price at an absolute minimum. So, if you're buying a $500,000 house, 5% of that is $25,000. That should be your absolute minimum you're looking at as in additional costs. Obviously, as Joey alluded to there, if you're using a buyer's agent, you're going to have additional costs and everything else. So every individual property is going to be different. Every state has different stamp duties and different costs for solicitors and all that sort of stuff as well. So take that as a grain of salt, but that's the general rule of thumb is 5% of the purchase property. So Joey, we have found the absolute perfect property. We definitely want to buy it. We both love it. And do we just go and make an offer now?
Absolutely not, for the reasons we just touched on then. So depending on the property, we want to be doing things like a strata report or a building and pest report before we even go out and make an offer. Let's say that the strata, let's be buying into a strata complex and the body corporate is $2 million in arrears or has a special levy coming up and each owner is needing to pay $150,000. Or you're buying into a house but it's ridden with termite damage. These are things that you want to be, potentially you might not even want to buy that property, or you could at least use it as leverage to go and make an offer on that property. So don't just rush in and go out and make an offer straight away. On top of that, you should 100% be doing plenty of research in the background as to what kind of offer do you make? Where do you start? If an agent says, hey, we want $520,000 for it, what do you do? Do you just say, yes, here's $520,000? Do you go and offer them $480,000 and then insult them? So it's really important that you've got an idea of what the kind of going rate, I suppose, what it would be, what kind of market value that property has. So as to not offend them, but to make sure you can go in and grab yourself a good deal and not overpay.
Yeah, 100%. And I think part of that due diligence process that we've been banging on about is understanding what type of value the property may be worth. Whenever I look at a property, I look at least 10 recent sales in the direct vicinity. And, if there's not that many in recent times, you have to sort of branch out a little bit and see what's happening in the other suburbs and sort of align what are the other recent sales and how they might correspond to the type of property that you are having. But yeah, identifying what sort of price point you think it will sell for. I mean, obviously, you as a buyer want to pay the lowest price possible, and the real estate agent that's representing the vendor wants to get the best possible price for the property. So you're always going to be a little bit different. You're always going to have different biases towards the price, but yeah, at least get a fundamental understanding of what you think the property is going to be worth. And then obviously negotiating is a big piece, which Joey and I are planning on doing a separate episode on. So hang out for that. Send us through any questions if you'd like to us to cover anything in the negotiation episode. It's a big topic and there's plenty to talk about in there, which we will delve more into. But starting with that fundamental price, and then having a negotiation plan is so essential to that process. So Joey, how do I know what is good value? Like, I don't want to overpay for that property.
So you've touched on it perfectly there by the research that you do when you go in and make that purchase, by looking at past comparable sales. That's going to give you your biggest indication of what the property is worth. So when a valuer goes in and values a property, they look at the previous sales of the last 3 months, and then they'll even go back the last 6 months, but they'll do a really, really, really small radius. I'm sure all the listeners know that if you live in suburb X, but the suburb just next door to you is a bit of an undesirable suburb, it's probably not a good idea to take those comparables. So you want to be looking at like-for-like suburbs. If you're buying outside of your backyard, it's a lot harder. So it's ideal to have someone with knowledge of that area or some hands and feet on the ground. But again, there's nothing more, I was going to say priceless, but there's nothing more valuable than actually looking at that previous sales history. Now, it is kind of black and white in that that's what that property sold for. Yours looks very similar. Yours is probably worth something similar, as long as it was purchased recently. There could be some caveats to that, though. Again, it might have been bought during an absolute peak of the market. So it's really good to have someone that understands the market on your side. So let's say, for example, we're buying a property now, but there aren't any previous sales for the last 18 months. How reliable is that sale from 2 years ago, if 2 years ago we were in the middle of a boom, for argument's sake? So it's really fundamental to make sure that you've got someone on your side that can talk you through these ebbs and flows of the market to kind of give a pretty good accurate figure, unless you had the identical property next door that sold last week. If you're in that fortunate situation, then that's probably the value of your property. And as you've touched on there, every buyer wants to buy for the absolute best price possible, and why wouldn't we? But we would understand that we're versing an agent that wants to get the very best price for their vendor as well. So a lot of the time there's compromise that needs to happen in the middle. But yeah, there's nothing more valuable than doing thorough research on past comparable sales.
Yeah, my old man's a real estate agent, and I think one of the fundamental things he's always said to me is a property is worth what someone's willing to pay for it. So although we can do as much comparable sales and see where we think that sort of price range is, I read something really interesting the other day, which was only two people alone can drive up the price of property. And if you think in a really hot market, there's two really motivated buyers at auction, and they've got deep pockets, they could be bidding $5,000, $5,000, $5,000, $5,000, $5,000, $5,000. And before you know it, it's the price of the property's increased by $40,000 within, 10 seconds. So, realistically, it's hard to really know the true value of what you think is going to happen at the exact point in the auction. But as Joey was alluding to there, all we can do is really take those comparable sales, and the best comparable sale is, as Joey said, the property next door that just sold at an exact price point, and that's, that's probably something pretty solid. But taking that for a grain of salt as well, there might be some history that someone buying that property really wants to get it for, and so even that could be a tad more expensive too. So again, it's all, as Joey alluded to, even flows, different markets, understanding how important it is, and these cycles do take a long time to play out. A property cycle 7 to 10 years. So in Joey's example before, if a property sold 18 months ago, how reliable can it be? Well, they could be completely different markets. It could have been a hot market back then. There could have been 20 people wanting to buy that exact property when now there's only 2. And so, it's hard to use that historical pricing as an exact price point, and that's why it's so essential to understand some good fundamental comparables in the area. As I said, before, even suburbs in the direct vicinity can be completely different, and I didn't mean that I would take them as a grain of salt, but what I'm trying to say is just trying to get a good understanding of everything that is available and how they correlate, and if they don't correlate, discard them completely. So, Joey, once I have got a successful offer, the real estate agent has accepted, what are the steps in order do I actually need to take before buying it?
So, firstly, you're going to want to actually get a signed contract. So, like a lot of the time, some offers have been accepted via email or over the phone, but that property is not yours. And it's happened with some clients of my dad's, and just last week, where they've been pipped at the post because someone else beat them to sign a contract at the same dollar value. They were booked in to go at 5 o'clock. Someone went at midday and signed a contract. Actually, I'll lie. They threw in an extra $5,000 and got there just a little bit earlier. And my dad's client got pushed aside for that exact reason. So the contract is not binding unless it's been signed by both parties as well. So the first thing you're going to want to do is actually get a signed contract at that agreed purchase price. At that point, depending on whether you've been given a cooling off period, you'll need to pay the deposit. If you've been given a cooling off period, you put down 0.25% of the purchase price upon successfully exchanging that contract. If there is no cooling off period, then you have to pay whatever the agreed deposit was. In the default is 10%. Solicitors can often negotiate that deposit reduction down to 5%. And until you've actually exchanged with that deposit payment, the property is technically still on the market and can be taken at any time. So just because your offer has been accepted doesn't mean that property is yours. There is no way of securing it until you have that contract. So yeah, really, some words of wisdom there. Please do not rest on your laurels once you think that you've got that property, particularly if you've bought it at a good price. I'd go and get that on a contract.
100%. And I think just to redirect that question a little bit as well, as every state is different. So I know in Sydney, as Joey just alluded to, that it's 0.25% of the purchase price as a sort of holding deposit. Here in Victoria, it's $1,000, or from the properties that I've purchased, it's been $1,000 sort of upfront deposit just to show the vendor and the real estate agent that you're serious, and your offer on a contract on a piece of paper actually means something. But every state is different. So obviously, find out what is relevant in the state that you're currently purchasing in. But yeah, and I think, all the states have different settlement periods as well. So although the process is relatively the same, it's always very important to identify how your local state or the state that you're buying in processes as the settlement goes out through that period. And I think also, use that to your advantage as well. If there is a cooling off period, or, you have got the contract subject to finance and all that sort of stuff, don't be scared that you're going to lose on the property. You can actually use that to your advantage. And I think, we'll jump into that in the next question, which is what happens if I do change my mind the next day, Joey?
Fortunately, if you do have that cooling off period, you're in a better position, I suppose, if you do want to change your mind. And firstly, I'd ask, why are you changing your mind? Is it because you're scared, or has something come up? If you've got a strata report and you've found out that, you're due for a $750,000 special levy as a combined strata, then you're going to have to pay a significant amount of money, then okay. But if you're just scared, then I'd, again, come back to why are we actually buying this property in the first place. But if there are genuine reasons that you shouldn't be buying the property, then all you'll do is forego that holding deposit. As you touched on there, you would have lost your $1,000. In New South Wales here, you would have lost that 0.25%. But again, I'd rather lose that $1,000 than buy into a purchase where I'm going to be struck with a $150,000 special levy, for argument's sake. So that could be money well spent. Do not think that you have to follow through for whatever reason. So once that cooling off period is done, you have to follow through to settlement unless you want to lose the rest of the deposit paid, which is either going to be a 5 or 10% deposit. So it could be a significant amount of money lost should you not go all the way through to settlement. Just during that period as well, as particularly if you've got that cooling off, it's when your lender will actually organise a valuation. So that could be another period where you do get unstuck, and you'll find out there if you're probably overpaying. Let's say you bought that property for $500,000, but your lender's only valued it at $420,000. You might not get your finance. In which case, again, you'll lose that holding deposit.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really critical point there, Joey, is why are you changing your mind? And, there's an actual word for it or a term for it. I've completely lost it. But essentially, we all, after we've made, it's the biggest financial decision of your life. Like, it's a huge process. It's a huge purchase. And, sometimes I've heard of many stories of people, putting a deposit on a house or making an offer on a house, and they wake up the next morning and they freak out like, oh, have I made a decision? Have I made the wrong decision? Is this going to cost me? Is this the wrong house? And, those thoughts go through everyone's mind. It's okay to have those thought processes. But I think, all of the hard work that you've done up to that point really should be touched on again, and know in yourself that, you've made the right decision based on all of the previous work that you have, unless, as well as what Joey alluded to, is there is something substantially wrong with it. It has the valuation come in significantly lower, then maybe you need to reconsider. Is there something wrong in the strata report? Has the solicitor come up with something that, is a major issue? Did you not read through the building and pest inspection properly prior, or did you just get one now and there's a massive issue and, it's deterring you from proceeding with that purchase? And as Joey said, $1,000, it looks like a lot of money, but in the scheme of things, it could save you tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars down the line if you're making the wrong purchase. So how long is settlement, Joey, and what do I need to do?
So I'll touch on New South Wales here. It's 42 days generally, but in all states, it's subject to really the purchaser and the vendor. It could be negotiated. You could negotiate a 3-month settlement, a 6-month settlement. You could negotiate a 2-week settlement should you be in the financial position to be putting down that money that quickly. So settlement periods are varied and can be changed as long as both solicitors have agreed to it. But the standard here in New South Wales, and I'll get you to touch on Victoria, but the standard here in New South Wales, 42 days. And should you have a more of an experienced solicitor on your side, there shouldn't really be anything that you need to do apart from maybe sign a couple of documents, but the solicitor should really be keeping you abreast of any updates or any changes, or touching base with your lender as well to make sure that the documents are all in readiness for the actual settlement. So there shouldn't be anything for you to do during that period. And I've also purchased in Queensland myself personally. And again, after we signed the contract, I just handed it over to the solicitor, and there wasn't anything for me to do besides sign some documents.
Yeah. So here in Victoria, it's a 30, 60 or 90-day settlement. They're generally the time frames that we look at. And, if you're buying at auction or something like that, you'd have to negotiate the terms before auction and before you're signing the contract. But yeah, it's a selection of the 3 of those. And obviously, as Joey said, can be changed depending on solicitors if they're both happy and all that sort of stuff. But they're definitely the time frames that we stick to here in Victoria. And the only other thing that I wanted to say, if you're an investor buying in a property, although the solicitor should take care of most of or pretty much everything during that process, it's not a time to just sit on your hands. If you're looking to rent out the property, I would even be negotiating before you sign a contract to be able to use the listing photos as rental photos, and be talking to property managers and saying to them, hey, we're settling on this date. We've got all these photos for the property. Can we rent it out now? And obviously, you're going to have to get signed consent from the current vendor or the current owner to proceed with that. And you, even in the contract, you can have a little disclosure there that says you're allowed to have 2 open inspections while they still own the property. And in that way, you're not waiting for another 4 to 8 weeks or however long it is to rent out the property after settlement. You can kick off that process straight away and hopefully have a tenant in there, a week or 2 after you've settled. So, Joey, I think we have covered all the questions today, mate. We've gotten through some pretty in-depth ones here. I think also we are planning on having another settlement discussion as well. What are the things you should be thinking about? What are the things that should play around in your mind, and what should you approach, and who else should you talk to, and the things that are going through your head at that point in time, as I just talked about before, is it the wrong decision? Is it the right decision? And how do you address those sort of thought processes? But again, if you guys are keen for any questions in that sort of area, and we're going to do a pre-settlement, a settlement, a negotiation, and then a Q&A, and then probably maybe even move on to, the next purchase. So doing a refinance and then going for the next investment, and we'll talk about things like diversification, all that sort of stuff in there. But again, if you guys have got any questions, please send them through. We really appreciate all of the feedback. If you're listening to this on either podcast or any podcast channel, both Joe and I would love a 5-star review. Any review would be amazing, but a 5-star would be absolutely perfect. And we always love some feedback, guys. So we really appreciate it. And I think that's it, Joey. Is there anything else you've got to share with us?
Yeah, just as you've touched on there, it's a pretty high level overview of kind of the process here and some common questions that we thought people would ask. And obviously, as I said, some family and friends have asked us in the past, but it's a really much more of a call out for that Q&A session. We'll curate some questions for the upcoming podcast, but we'd love the listeners to give us the commonly asked questions. There's no question that is too simple, and there's no question that's too thorough. We'd love to just give as much as we can. But other than that, mate, that's it. I'm really raring to go and can't wait for the next one.
Me too, mate. I always love having a chat to you, and thanks again for coming on, mate, and sharing your time with us.
Not a problem. We'll catch you next episode, mate.
I'm really enjoying these episodes with Joey. We've got some incredible feedback already and have some great questions lined up for the Q&A. I'm always looking for more guests to come onto the show. If you're under 30 and have 1 or more investment properties, whether it's good, bad or ugly, I would love to talk to you about it. Even if you're interested into getting into the property sector, let's have a chat. The main focus is to help other soon-to-be young investors with tips and tricks along the journey, learn from the mistakes that we have made, and ignite the fire to set themselves up financially for the rest of their lives. If you're interested in sharing your story, you can go to jordandeong.com/podcast, where there's a podcast inquiry button at the top that will guide you through the next steps. If you want to see what else I'm up to, you can go to YouTube and type in Jordan De Jong, where you'll find the Smashed Avo Property podcast being hosted on YouTube, and plenty of other content that I'm putting out consistently. If you're keen for more content like this, make sure you subscribe, and please leave us a review with any feedback for future podcasts. And until next time, happy house hunting.